The echo of this violence that is heard in several parts of the world refers to a religion, to Islam, even if history teaches us that man has a penchant for violence. The worst crimes in human history were committed by men faithless and lawless. Violence in the name of Islam reflects the symptoms of a deep phenomenon. In our time, the Muslim world gives contradictory signs. It presents paradoxical situations. The Muslim world has enormous natural wealth, but most of its countries face major challenges that hinder their development and affect the fundamental rights of a large population. The problem is complex. It is the result of many factors: politics, economics, history, religion. There are internal factors, external factors, but at the bottom of the problem, there is an invisible factor. It is the dominant culture in Muslim societies. The Muslim world is suffering the full consequences of a crisis of thought well rooted in history. Since its revelation in the Arabian Peninsula 14 centuries ago, Islam has extended its influence to large parts of the world, sometimes by conquest, sometimes by population migration, sometimes by trade. Over time, Muslims have experienced ups and downs. The Muslim world had its moment of glory between the 8th century and the 13th century, with the development of philosophy, architecture, medicine, science. After the golden age of Islamic civilization, the Muslim world has plunged into a crisis that has persisted for centuries. The history of the Muslim world reveals a dark and less glorious side: social injustices, the regression of knowledge, the spread of superstition, tyranny, internal conflicts. At the same time, Europe gradually freed itself from a dark period in its history, the Middle Ages. The European Renaissance was born in Italy and spread throughout Europe. The French Revolution caused immense political and social upheavals in France and Europe. The Industrial Revolution propelled the West into a new era, where technology, production, and capitalism prevail. From the 19th century onwards, the Muslim world, which had been falling behind Europe for a long time, paid the price. This is the era of colonization. Shock is severe. In fact, it's a double shock. The first shock is the shock of the military invasion, with its share of tragedies and victims. The second shock is the shock of modernity. The shock of the colonial campaigns was a parenthesis of history, even if the consequences were heavy. The surge of people through the mobilization of popular resistance and armed struggle allowed Muslim countries to regain their independence. The second shock, that of modernity, continues to shake Muslim societies to this day. After the euphoria of independence, Muslims wake up to another world. The Muslim world is discovering new concepts, a new reality: modern state, law, institutions, democracy, public services, human rights, women's rights, progress, technology. The landscape of the Muslim world has changed a lot. But despite visible transformations, the divide with the time is considerable in terms of human rights, democracy, development, progress. The record is disappointing. The development indicators of the vast majority of Muslim countries show a great delay. Culturally, Muslims are torn between, on the one hand, a heritage, a pattern of thought, a way of life that belongs to an ancient time, and on the other hand, a new reality with its own points of reference, its own codes, its own requirements. As a result, the crisis of thought that has long raged in the Muslim world is now fueled by modernity. Certainly, at the level of individuals, there are Muslims who have managed to find the point of balance, to reconcile their faith and the requirements of the modern era, but at the level of society, the misunderstanding between cultural heritage and today's world creates a distortion with modernity. The weight of tradition, the weight of life experience. In short, the weight of culture has long slowed down the evolution of the Muslim world. Well, certainly the weight of culture on convictions and behavior is not a question specific to Muslims. Every human being carries in his genes the DNA of his ancestors, and the DNA determines the color of the skin, the color of the eyes, the physical features. In the same way, every human being is a bearer of a cultural heritage, a cultural DNA, ideas, convictions, choices, habits, behaviors. All this is so ingrained in the mind and the unconscious that a human being often has trouble questioning his cultural heritage. And when religion or ideology mingles with culture in some minds, it produces a tendency to sacralize one's ideas. This is the way to all kinds of excesses. To move forward in reflection, it is important to answer an existential question, a question that is addressed to every human being, to each of us. What is sacred in man and what is not? Believer or not believer, black or white, rich or poor, man has a part of him that is sacred and a part which has nothing sacred. Man is not perfect. What is sacred in man are four things: his life, his dignity, his freedom, and his property. On the other hand, man is not a perfect being. He could be wrong. Moreover, in the religious heritage, perfection is a divine attribute. Only God is perfect. Man is in essence a fallible being. That's why two things in man are not sacred: his ideas and his actions. Ideas and actions can be discussed, they can be criticized, they can be challenged. Humility prompts everyone to admit they can be wrong. Wisdom encourages each of us to question our ideas, convictions, culture, traditions, and actions. The awakening of the Muslim world was painful in a world that has changed. The civilizational earthquake has shaken the Muslim world. Suddenly, the Muslim world faced a huge challenge, apprehending a new world with an intellectual machine frozen for a long time. The shock of modernity is so violent that sometimes the situation is unbelievable. When Muslims first discovered photography, many theologians hastened to launch a fatwa, a religious opinion. According to this fatwa, photography is haram, that is to say, illicit in Islam. In the time of the Prophet, Islam prohibited what is called in Arabic taswir. Taswir means making statues intended for idolatry. This is understandable for a religion that advocates worshipping of the one God. When photography was discovered, Muslims called this new technique taswir. As unlikely as it may seem, the origin of this surprising fatwa that makes photography illicit is found in a simple linguistic misunderstanding, a problem of polysemy. To add insult to injury, we can find even today a theologian who continues to proclaim that photography is illegal in front of a camera.
لكن الراجع عندي والله أعلم أن التصوير الفوتوغرافي حرام ولا يجوز لعموم النصوص، وهو يسمى تصويرا، وهو يختلف عن النظر في المرآة، لأن المرآة تنقل الأمر كما هو. إذا ضحكت يظهر ضحكك في المرآة، لكن في الصورة لا.
Unfortunately, the disappointments of thought in the Muslim world touch much more serious subjects with dramatic consequences. Certainly, reformist speeches have emerged for a century and a half. In the face of modernity, the few rational appeals to the reform of Muslim thought have drowned in a louder discourse, more emotional and often disconnected from reality.
فروجوا للحريات وروجوا لقانون الأمم المتحدة المعروف بحقوق الإنسان، قانون حقوق الإنسان، وزعموا أنه يتفق مع الشريعة.
الخطأ الثاني إخواني هو الاعتقاد بعدم كفاية الشريعة وبالحاجة إلى الاستعارة من منظومات خارجها كالديمقراطية لسد نواقص الشريعة. الشريعة في حقيقتها منظومة متكاملة تذهل إذا اطلعت على تفاصيلها.
Faced with the inability to grasp the new reality and the inability to question itself, the Muslim world has locked itself almost without a way out. From the beginning of the 20th century, there has been a politicization of religious discourse that was confirmed with the creation in 1929 of the Muslim Brotherhood Association in Egypt by Hassan al-Banna. Born in 1906 into a conservative family, Hassan al-Banna is the undisputed leader of political Islam. As a teacher, he devoted his life to preaching the return to religion. The writings and positions of Hassan al-Banna have shaped the intellectual foundations and convictions of a broad elite of the Muslim world. Hassan al-Banna is the flag-bearer of the Islamic State, a God-ruled state that would apply Sharia law for the good of society. As eloquent speaker, Hassan al-Banna drew a dream for future generations. His sharp speech and his relentless political activities eventually drew many enemies. On the 8th of December 1948, Egyptian head of government Mahmoud Fahmy Nekrachi decided to dissolve the Muslim Brotherhood Association. A few days later, Mahmoud Fahmy Nekrachi is murdered. A few weeks later, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood Association, Hassan al-Banna, is assassinated outside the headquarters of the Muslim Youth Association in Cairo. Since that event, the Muslim Brotherhood has waged a long political struggle, and this organization has spread other movements throughout the Muslim world throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. These diverse political religious movements all have in common this obsession with gaining power to establish an Islamic state and apply Sharia law. In Egypt, after long years and long episodes alternating confrontation and appeasement with political authority, the Muslim Brotherhood Association came to power in 2012, following the fall of Hosni Mubarak, who had accumulated 30 years in power. The election of President Mohamed Morsi in the context of the Arab Spring foreshadowed another destiny for Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood. Finally, President Mohamed Morsi's term did not last more than a year, and the Muslim Brotherhood was brutally ousted from power by the military, who, as before, took matters into their own hands. In Sudan, the Muslim Brotherhood participated in a coup in 1989. They overthrew the elected government and became partners in power with the military, an alliance that did not last long, since the Islamists were driven out of power by the military, who ended up committing Sudan into a civil war. As for Algeria, there was the experience of the Islamic Salvation Front and its bloody fight against the military after the failure of the democratic process. The bloody struggle for power between the military and the Islamists mourned Algeria for 10 years, from 1991 to 2002. It was the Black Decade that claimed tens of thousands of lives. In Morocco, Islamist currents are mainly represented by two movements, Al-Adl wal-Ihsan and his leader Abdeslam Yassin, a movement advocating the boycott of institutions and fierce opposition to power, except that his leader Abdeslam Yassin died before realizing his dream. The second movement, the Justice and Development Party, advocates participation in political life and elections. Thanks to the Arab Spring, the Justice and Development Party won the elections in 2011, which allowed it to drive the Moroccan government for a decade before being removed from power after an unprecedented electoral debacle. Inexperience and lack of realism have defeated the ambitions of this Islamist movement, which ended its run politically and financially bankrupt. An extreme case of Islamist movements is that of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant and its ephemeral state built with fire and blood. These experiences, among others, have cost the Muslim world dearly. The politicization of Islam is one of the worst deviations of Muslim thought. The politicization of Islam finds its roots in history, in the opinion of rigorous scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah is a Muslim jurist, philosopher, lecturer, and scholar. His ideas are widespread in the Muslim world. Ibn Taymiyyah was born in Haran, Turkey, and grew up in Damascus. He began writing books and teaching at the age of 17. Ibn Taymiyyah was imprisoned and arrested several times for inciting public disorder. In his book entitled The Legitimate Policy of Reforming the Ruler and the Subjects, Ibn Taymiyyah announces a rule that he considers fundamental. If authority is removed from religion, or religion from authority, the conditions of the people are corrupt. In the wake of this politicization rooted in history, some concepts are propelled to the forefront. Before examining these concepts that shake the Muslim world and beyond, it is important to take stock of a fundamental issue. Human civilization has always been based on universal human values. A well-educated, fulfilled, responsible human being is the product of patience, love, effort, generosity, and so on. A peaceful human society is the fruit of a stable family, solidarity, compassion, justice, freedom, loyalty, altruism, sacrifice. Every material achievement culminates in a long journey built by knowledge, work, humility, honesty, perseverance, innovation. In short, everything acquired by man, from the smallest to the greatest, any form of human progress, any form of social, material, or technical progress is just the result of a set of values. These values are the building blocks of human civilization. At a time when everything they enable to be achieved is useful but ephemeral, values are timeless, immutable, and eternal. Values are not man's work. No nation can claim to be the inventor or cradle of human values. It is not a philosopher who invented justice or freedom. It is not a scientist who would have developed or discovered the values of solidarity or equality in a laboratory. A human society is doomed to sink into a dark fate. It can aspire to progress only when it implements human values. Knowledge, justice, freedom, and all other values are the keys to emancipation. However, the virtuoso effect of values is only possible by taking up two great challenges. And not the least, the first challenge is identifying all human values. Otherwise, you will never find the magic potion to assemble the puzzle. The second challenge is to find the right mix of all values. Intelligently combining human values to progress in life is a real challenge, an everyday challenge. Freedom is good, but too much freedom is dangerous. Solidarity is good, but little solidarity can weaken the family bond, and it can disintegrate a society. Work accompanied by humility is fruitful, but work motivated by vanity is dangerous, and so on. To find the right balance of values, we must again appeal to a human value, that is, wisdom. Wisdom is what makes it possible to make the right choices in life. The fundamental question of values applies to all human societies, and for once, it applies to the Muslim world. Throughout history, the Muslim world has demonstrated its inability to assimilate certain fundamental values, or say it could not sufficiently assimilate these values yet present in its heritage. This has weighed heavily on Muslim culture and the situation in the Muslim world. Freedom is at the top of these values sacrificed on the altar of tradition. In the history of the Muslim world, apart from a few flashes of freedom carried by literature, arts, architecture, and sciences, most of the time, stagnation reigned. Inertia took precedence over freedom. The word freedom often arouses great distrust in the Muslim world, sometimes even hostility. History teaches us that freedom of expression, freedom of thought, creativity, initiative, and risk-taking are salutary freedoms that drive progress. Alas, these freedoms are often stifled by the weight of tradition and culture within the family, at the community level, in human societies. Freedom is often perceived in the Muslim world as an intruder. It is reduced to an imported concept, to an attack on morality, to a promotion of debauchery. It is not excessive to say that freedom has long suffered from an almost total misunderstanding in the Muslim world.
حرية، تحرر، تنوير، كلمات منها ما هي براقة، ومنها ما هي مظلمة، ومنها لا معنى لها، ومنها محتملة لعدة معاني، لكن كلها تنصب في شيء واحد، أنها ليست هي الهدى، ليست هي الحق، ليست هي من الله عز وجل.
أحسن الله إليكم صاحب الفضيلة. وهذا سائل يقول: ما حكم من يقول إن الحرية أفضل من تطبيق الشريعة؟
هذا تشكون أنه كافر، يقول إن الحرية أحسن من تطبيق الشريعة، هذا كافر أشد الكفر والعياذ بالله.
The situation is all the more dramatic as this tendency to demonize freedom seems in contradiction with the very principles of religion. The Quran announces no constraint in religion. This means that it is unacceptable to force a person in the name of religion to change his or her convictions and ideas, or to impose a course or conduct or a way of life on them. choices in life and convictions are about the freedom of each person, the personal intimacy of every human being. The Islamic tradition relates a famous story that dates back to the first era of Islam. History books cite the case of a Muslim dignitary who was called to order by the second successor of the Prophet, saying, "Since when do you attribute to yourself the right to enslave men when their mothers gave birth to them free?" Many Muslims cannot admit that freedom takes precedence over religion. At several stages in their history, Muslim societies have failed to make good use of their heritage to build a rational and healthy approach to freedom. Neither could Muslims establish a wise practice of individual and collective freedoms. The abuse of freedom has deprived the Muslim world of a better fate, and the neglect of a supreme human value as freedom has weighed heavily on the assimilation of other values. If the Muslim world is shaken by modernity, if progress has not been achieved, it is mainly because of the historical neglect of a fundamental value well-rooted in the religious heritage, al-jihad. Al-jihad means nothing more and nothing less than innovation. In the Islamic tradition, it is promised a divine reward for every effort of innovation, even when it does not succeed, and it is promised a double reward for any successful innovation effort. The historical era that completely changed the destiny of the Muslim world was that of some scholars of Islam. They have confined al-jihad to the field of theology only, what gave rise to the many doctrines of Islam. Yet exceptions exist. What do you think are the most prestigious and oldest universities in the world? The University of Beijing, the University of Harvard, the University of Cambridge, the University of Oxford? Well, no. The world's oldest university is located elsewhere. In Morocco, where scientists have discovered the oldest human presence dating back 300,000 years. And Morocco is home to the oldest university in the world. Al-Qarawiyyin University was founded in the year 859 by a Muslim woman in Fez. Yes, it was the initiative of a woman. Al-Qarawiyyin University taught generations theology, Arabic language, mathematics, and more. This nice example of innovation among Muslims has not evolved much to compete with the prestigious universities of our time. This dynamic of innovation stopped a long time ago. Outside of religion, except for a few flashes of Islamic civilization in science and etiquette, Muslims have neglected innovation. They missed the train of progress. To add insult to injury, the innovation in theology, also known as religious jurisprudence, also stopped about 4 centuries after the advent of Islam. The Muslim world thus found itself in an atypical situation. Religious thought froze, and it froze with it innovation in the vast fields of life, thus condemning Muslims to a rudimentary life and to suffer the misdeeds of arbitrariness. For the Muslim world, time has stopped for centuries. But while the Muslim world sank into deep lethargy, time never stopped elsewhere. The phase shift with time, the weight of tradition, the weight of intellectual stagnation, and the eclipse of innovation have resulted in the emergence of confusing concepts with serious consequences. Sharia is a subject considered by many Muslims, but then as a great cause. The great paradox, is that a great misunderstanding surrounds the concept of Sharia. In the 14th century, the time of the Mamluk in Egypt, Sheikh Tajuddin Sabki, an eminent theologian of the time, harshly reproached the state for hiring farmers more than 3 years in the army. And the theologian's challenge of a political or administrative decision suddenly takes on a completely different dimension. They say it is the law of the military cabinet. The only law is the law of God. To claim that there is a law superior to Sharia law is blasphemy. While Ibn Khaldun is of a completely different opinion. Ibn Khaldun is one of the most brilliant Muslim thinkers and historians ever. Born in Tunis, Ibn Khaldun lived in Andalusia, Maghreb, Egypt and Syria. Ibn Khaldun is not in the opinion of Tajuddin Sabki. Ibn Khaldun has a completely different speech, saying, "Theologians are reference persons in the sciences of religion, but they cannot be decision makers for the affairs of the state. State affairs are the responsibility of influential social forces." So, what is Sharia? Sharia is a concept that emerged 2 centuries after the advent of Islam. However, its origin is found in verse 13 of chapter 42 of the Quran. This verse explains the verb shara at the origin of the word Sharia. Shara in Arabic means legislate. The verse says, "He has legislated to you in matters of religion what he has enjoined upon Noah, what we have revealed to you, and what we enjoined upon Abraham, Moses, and Jesus." Establish religion, and do not make it a subject of division. This verse establishes a simple equation. Sharia is none other than religion. In this case, the religion is Islam. So Sharia is really just another name for Islam and nothing else. But religion is a set of beliefs, practices, values, and obligations for the believer, for the free and responsible individual. Does proclaiming the application of Sharia law by a state means that the authorities of that state must impose faith, or impose the practice of rituals, or impose rules of conduct on everyone? Never, because it would be contrary to the principle of freedom of the human being. The historical misunderstanding surrounding this concept of Sharia has other surprising extensions in our time.
أيها المسلمون في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها، أتحبون ماذا؟ تحبون أن تحكموا بالقانون الوضعي الذي هو من نتاج البشر؟ أم تحبون أن تحكموا بقوانين الشريعة الإسلامية؟ الشريعة الإسلامية حل لجميع مشاكلك.
نريد أن نصل إلى الفرق ما بين الشريعة والفقه الإسلامي من جهة، وما بين القانون من جهة أخرى، القانون الوضعي. لكن ينبغي أن يعلم أننا عندما نعقد هذه المقارنة لا نعنى ذلك أن القانون الوضعي أهل لأن يقارن بشريعة السماء، محال، لأن القانون الوضعي صنع بشري، وأما شريعة السماء هي وحي من الله. الذين يضعون القانون الوضعي يخضعون للأهواء، للنزعات، للمصالح الشخصية، العواطف البشرية، الظروف وأحوال تتغير، وهذا لا يجادل به أحد، وبهذا تكون القوانين الوضعية عرضة للتغيير والتبديل، ولا يكون لها مقياس ثابت للأحكام.
The Sharia would therefore be the law of God that systematically opposes the law of man, as thought by Sheikh Tajuddin Sabki in the 14th century. Is it rational to oppose a religion to the traffic code, for example? A positive law that would preserve human life, its rights, its dignity. A law that would preserve justice and fairness. Why would it be contrary to religion? The assimilation of religion, or Sharia, into law is one of the worst misfortunes in the history of the Muslim world. Moreover, some Muslims make astonishing shortcuts, such as claiming that the Quran is their constitution. The Muslim Brotherhood has long proclaimed that. Assimilating religion to a law is absurd. Systematically opposing religion to positive law makes no sense. As the legal scholars say, the law is based on a contract. And precisely the Quran evokes the concept of ahd, or commitment. In this way, the positive law would be a kind of contract, of social contract between the citizens of the same nation. The Quran also speaks of the concept of mithaq, that is, of charter. The marriage certificate, for example, is described in the Quran as a kind of mithaq. So in fact, the positive law is just a form of contract or charter binding the citizens of a state. Citizens of a state are therefore free to agree on the content of the contract or charter that binds them, on the basis of rights and duties. They are free to change this contract or charter according to the evolution of society and legitimate individual and collective interests. So, the positive law, or the law of men, has its place in the approach of religion. And the debate on the opposition between religion and law is a false debate. When we talk about the modern state, we talk about the Constitution. We talk about laws. We talk about elections, democracy, government, budget, public finances, etc. The modern state is the culmination of a historical process of social innovation. In front of the modern state, what is an Islamic state? How is an Islamic state organized? How does it work? We don't really know. There is no reference or description of the Islamic State in the sources of Islam. Yet Islamic State is a pillar of the Muslim Brotherhood's ideology. Hassan al-Banna says in the message of the 5th Conference of the Brotherhood in 1939, Islam is a belief and worship, a homeland and a nationality, a religion and a state. The word jihad is derived from the Arabic word jud, which is effort. So jihad means making an effort, but not any effort. Jihad means making an effort for a good cause. And since jihad is a religious concept, the effort is driven by the believer's faith. In fact, jihad is the individual's ongoing effort to make a positive contribution to his own life, the lives of his close people, and the interests of the community through patience, knowledge, work, caring for the family, solidarity, generosity, and so on. This can be called civil jihad. In exceptional cases, jihad is considered an act of self-defense in the face of aggression or an act of armed resistance to an occupant. And in this case, it's a warrior jihad. Originally, therefore, in the authentic approach of religion, jihad is 99% a civil jihad because it is a daily test to mobilize every day, every moment for the good of oneself and for the good of others. And jihad is only 1% a warrior jihad. The historical misappropriation of the concept of jihad has completely changed the situation. Nowadays, in the minds of many Muslims, civil jihad almost completely fades away, gives way to the warrior jihad. This paradigm shift has had a terrible impact on the Muslim world. History tells us that Muslim countries were able to repel colonizers through armed struggle and after long battles. Once independence was gained, the hardest was yet to come. The experiences of most Muslim countries show that building a stable, equitable, modern and prosperous society seems to be a difficult mission. In the recent history of Muslim countries, the warrior jihad has triumphed. The civil jihad has failed. The warrior approach of jihad has more recent extensions, the violence that has been going on in different parts of the world. Abuses in the name of religion are numerous in the history of humanity, and Muslims are no exception. The Muslim world needs to recast key concepts such as Sharia, Jihad, Alish Jihad, and Islamic State, among others. Ibn Khaldun sums up the fate of the Muslim world since the 14th century already. The subversions that hide under cover of religion is a flourishing trade at the time of the intellectual decline of societies. Ibn Khaldun has long since put his finger on the source of the problem, but the echo of his rational discourse has been lost in the meanderings of history. The intellectual decline, as Ibn Khaldun calls it, in which the Muslim world became bogged down, has led to underdevelopment and violence. The real struggle in the Muslim world is a battle of ideas in order to rehabilitate the place of knowledge, freedom, and innovation. The real struggle is that of the overhaul of the value system.